Gail Bradbrook, what are the immediate demands of the Extinction Rebellion movement?
So we have three demands. The first one is for government and other institutions to tell the truth, and also in that way it's not just a lip service by declaring emergencies and then carrying on with business as usual. That also means reversing policies inconsistent with that truth, so stopping immediate harms that are happening. In the UK, what that means, for example, is that we have fracking happening in this country. We're opening up new coal mines. We have the planned expansion of the railway system, but through what's basically an aviation shuttle service called HS2 that's going to deforest Britain bigger than has happened since World War I. So tell the truth and reverse inconsistent policies. The second demand is for net zero carbon emissions by 2025 and halting biodiversity loss. And the reason we have such a tight target there is that this is definitely and absolutely an emergency, and what we need is for governments to act like it's an emergency. If Britain, again, I know the UK situation more, carries on as it's doing with very, very minor reductions in its emissions, it will have run out of its so-called carbon budget. I don't believe there are any carbon budgets myself, actually, within a few years' time, and they keep missing targets. So this idea we can have a 2050 target is nonsense. The third thing is then, how do you go about seeing these changes? What policies should we have? Should we have carbon budgeting or carbon taxes? Should we put pressure on people to stop flying or go vegan or whatever? Should we look at the farming community and how they could farm differently? Well, within all of that and loads of great ideas and loads of debate, and Extinction Rebellion is very clear. It's not up to us to have a position on any of that. Within the movement, there'll be lots of opinions and so on and lots of debates. We want a citizens' assembly. It's a form of democracy that comes from the older times, from Greece, from Athens. And it was actually how democracy used to be. It wasn't all about voting by a long way. Most things were done by citizens' juries. So you select through a lottery system, like a jury, demographically representative sample of your citizens, and they're given critical thinking skills, and they are given lots of information by experts and well facilitated, and they tend to come up with really good policy solutions, and it's a really good way to handle these kinds of issues that, frankly, our current democracies are just not able to deal with.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, consumer capitalism and its ability to basically disarm the population in dealing with the climate crisis. You've talked about the relationship between the mushrooming debt in the world and the climate crisis. Could you expand on that?
So, yeah, what I would say is that in its first iteration, Extinction Rebellion is really about democracy by calling in for these new democratic forms for people to have their power. And frankly, in many countries of the world, democracy is in just absolute shambles. It certainly is in the UK. As people understand that there's an emergency, this democracy is not working. There's going to be two directions of travel. One is in the direction of more democracy, and so that means people's assemblies and really understanding how we can work together. And the other is in the direction of less democracy, which is the very great risk of eco-fascism. So that's the focus on democracy. What some of us are looking at, and it's an early focus, and as a movement we will write papers and share ideas for feedback. But we're talking about how we're going to take on the finance system. So we have an economic system that essentially is killing life on Earth. Let's put it that way. It's very simple. As one economist once said, Kenneth Boulding, he said that to expect that you can have exponential growth on a finite planet, you either have to be a madman or an economist. And I think increasingly, and I've spoken to members of the elites really recently, to investment bankers and so on, people are frightened, and actually their children are putting a lot of pressure on them, and they know some kind of change has to come. And in Extinction Rebellion, we're generally not, well, I'm not speaking for everybody personally, but as a movement, we're not ideological. We're not taking a position against one kind of economic system or for another. We're saying, basically, this is not working. We need to have a grown-up conversation about what kind of system do we need, both politically and legally and culturally and economically, that will stop this ridiculous, outrageous harming that we're doing to ourselves and the planet. And obviously, there's some people absolutely on the front line of the crisis. crisis, and it's an intergenerational injustice. And how do we then move into a situation where we can repair the harm that we've done? So what I think we're going to need to move into is a mass debt refusal, where we say we're not going to pay the debts that we have, and some of us with some privilege might take on some debts and actually give the money to people at the front line of the crisis. That's the kind of direction I'd like to see us move into.